I went hiking alone in the dead of winter, the kind of winter where the cold feels sharp instead of just cold. The sky was a dull gray, heavy and flat, like it could start snowing at any second. The forest was silent in a way that felt unnatural, not peaceful, just empty. No birds, no wind in the trees, just the soft crunch of my boots on frozen dirt and patches of old snow that had hardened like rock. The trail followed a narrow stream that cut through the woods. Most of the water was frozen, but the center still moved slowly, dark and quiet, slipping under thin sheets of ice. I could hear it in places, a low, steady sound that followed me as I walked. The trail itself was mostly clear at first, just frozen ground with scattered ice patches that I stepped around carefully. I took my time. I knew winter hiking was unforgiving. One mistake could turn into a real problem fast. I had checked the weather, packed layers, extra food, and a headlamp even though I planned to be back well before dark. I told myself I was being smart. Still, there was a feeling in my chest that I could not shake, a low pressure that grew stronger the farther I went. It wasn't fear exactly. It was awareness, the kind that comes when you realize there is no room for error. After a couple of miles, the trail narrowed. Trees crowded closer together, their bare branches twisting overhead like tangled wire. The stream ran tighter to the path now, cutting deeper into the earth. The ground sloped upward on one side, rough and steep, and dropped sharply on the other side into the creek below. I stopped for a moment and looked ahead. The trail was no more than 4 feet wide, maybe less in spots, and it was completely coated in ice. Not patchy ice, not thin ice, a solid, smooth sheet that looked like glass. It stretched across the trail for several yards, following the curve of the creek. The slope on the left rose at a sharp angle, too steep to grab onto easily. The right side dropped straight down about 10 feet into the water. I stood there staring at it, feeling my heart pick up speed. Turning back crossed my mind. It really did, but I told myself it was manageable. I had crossed icy sections before. I had good boots. I just needed to go slow. I stepped onto the ice and felt my foot slide instantly. I pulled it back and stood still, breathing slowly. The ice was worse than I thought. There was no texture to it at all. No grit, no cracks, just smooth, frozen water shaped into a trap. I lowered myself to my knees, then thought better of it. If I slipped from standing or kneeling, I would go down hard. I decided to crawl. I got down on all fours, pressing my gloved hands flat against the ice. It was slick and cold, even through the gloves. I tested my weight slowly, inch by inch, spreading myself out to lower my center of gravity. For a moment, it felt like the right call. I moved forward carefully, barely lifting my hands and knees, sliding them instead. Then my body started to drift. It was slow at first, almost gentle. I felt myself moving sideways, toward the edge of the trail. I tried to stop it by pressing harder with my hands, but there was nothing to grip. The ice offered no resistance at all. My heart slammed against my ribs. I shifted my weight the other way, trying to counter it, but that only made it worse. I was sliding. There was no sudden loss of balance, no dramatic moment. Just the quiet realization that I was no longer in control. My body kept moving toward the drop, steady and unstoppable. I dug my fingers into the ice, but they just skidded uselessly. My boots slipped behind me, and I felt the edge of the trail brush against my leg. Then I was suspended. For a split second, my body hung in the air. No ground under me, no support, just space. Time stretched out in a strange way. My mind was completely clear and completely terrified at the same time. I had one sharp, undeniable thought. I'm about to get really, really hurt. It reminded me of those old cartoons, where a character runs off a cliff and hangs there for a second before falling. Except this wasn't funny. There was no music, no sign to hold up, just the cold air and the sound of my own breath rushing out of me. I fell. Instinct took over. Somehow, in that brief drop, I twisted my body and got my feet pointing down. I don't remember deciding to do it. It just happened. I hit the creek hard, feet first, and the water exploded up around me. The cold was instant and brutal, like being stabbed all over at once. It knocked the breath out of me and sent a shock through my legs that made my vision blur. My legs bent on impact, acting like shock absorbers, and that probably saved me from breaking something. Even so, the pain was intense. A deep, tearing pain shot through the back of my thigh, sharp enough to make my stomach turn. I collapsed forward into the freezing water, soaking my clothes completely. The creek wasn't deep, but it didn't matter. The cold was overwhelming. My body screamed at me to get out. I scrambled to my knees, slipping on wet rocks, fighting panic as my muscles started to feel stiff almost immediately. My hands were clumsy and numb as I grabbed at roots and frozen dirt along the bank. I dragged myself out of the creek and lay there for a moment, gasping, water dripping from my clothes and pooling beneath me. My whole body shook violently, not just from the cold, but from the shock of what had just happened. I stared up at the gray sky through the bare branches and tried to slow my breathing. Eventually, I forced myself to move. Staying still was not an option. Wet clothes in winter could turn dangerous fast. I pushed myself to my feet, testing my weight carefully. My right leg screamed in protest. I couldn't straighten it fully without pain. It felt tight and weak, like a rubber band stretched too far. I limped back up the bank and onto the trail, avoiding the icy section entirely by grabbing onto trees and digging my boots into the slope. It was slow and ugly, but I made it. Once I was past it, I didn't stop. I didn't look around. I just focused on putting one foot in front of the other. The hike back to my car felt endless. Every step sent pain through my leg. My wet clothes grew colder as the minutes passed, and my teeth chattered so hard my jaw hurt. I stopped only long enough to wring out my sleeves and pull on an extra layer, my fingers barely working. The forest felt different now, more threatening. Every sound made my nerves jump. I kept thinking about how easily things could have gone worse. A broken leg, a head injury, being stuck there alone in freezing temperatures with no way to get help. The thought followed me the entire way back. When I finally saw my car through the trees, relief hit me so hard I felt dizzy. I made it to the driver's seat and just sat there for a while, heater blasting, hands shaking as feeling slowly came back into them. My leg throbbed with a deep, steady pain, but I could move it. That mattered. Later, a doctor told me I had pulled my hamstring badly. No surgery, no cast, just rest and time. I felt incredibly lucky, but luck doesn't erase memory. That moment on the trail stays with me. The slow slide, the helplessness, the second of weightlessness where my brain understood exactly what was coming and could do nothing to stop it. That was the scariest part. Not the fall, not the pain, just that clear, quiet thought hanging in the air with me. I still hike, I still love the woods, but I don't treat winter trails the same anymore. Ice doesn't look harmless to me now. Narrow paths don't feel casual. I learned, the hard way, how thin the line is between a normal day outside and something that could change everything. I walked away from that creek on my own. I drove myself home. I healed. But every time I see ice stretched across a trail, I remember that feeling of floating, right before gravity takes over, and I know how close I came to not walking away at all. I was on a hiking trip that included a high rope course built into the forest, the kind meant to test balance and nerves more than strength. It sat on a ridge above the trail, anchored to tall trees, with platforms, cables, and hanging obstacles stretched across open air. From the ground, it didn't look that high. From up there, it felt like the forest floor had dropped away completely. It was a clear day, cool but not cold, with sunlight cutting through the trees in sharp lines. The woods smelled like dry leaves and pine sap. Everything felt calm and controlled. The course was part of a larger outdoor area, and I trusted it without really thinking. The cables were thick steel. The harness looked solid. The carabiners were heavy and cold in my hands. It all felt official, safe, designed to keep mistakes from turning into disasters. I remember stepping onto the first platform and feeling the height settle into my chest. The ground was far enough away that people below looked small and unreal. The wind moved more freely up there, brushing against my clothes and making the cables hum softly. Each step required focus. Each movement made the harness tug slightly at my waist and legs. I trusted that tug. I trusted it completely. As I moved farther along the course, the obstacles became harder. Narrow foot cables, slanted boards, sections where you had to lean back into the harness and walk sideways. My muscles were tense the whole time, but my mind stayed steady. I was careful. I clipped where I was supposed to clip. I moved slowly. I didn't rush anything. There was one section where the course crossed a wider gap. No platform underneath, just open air and trees far below. I stepped onto the cable, hands gripping the upper line, boots balancing on the thin steel beneath me. I felt the harness take some of my weight as I leaned back slightly. Everything felt normal. Then something changed. It wasn't dramatic. There was no loud snap or sudden jolt, just a strange looseness, a feeling that something wasn't holding the way it should. The harness shifted in a way I hadn't felt before, sliding instead of supporting. My body reacted before my brain did, tightening, trying to correct my balance. That's when the thought hit me. Oh no, I'm going to fall here. It wasn't panic. It wasn't screaming fear. It was calm and sharp and terrifyingly clear. The kind of thought that arrives fully formed, with no room for denial. In that instant, I understood that whatever was supposed to stop me wasn't doing its job. I dropped. The sensation was unreal. My stomach lifted hard into my chest as the air rushed past me. The cables and platforms flashed upward and out of sight. The forest below rushed closer faster than my mind could catch up. Time stretched and compressed at the same time. I was aware of everything and nothing. I remember thinking very clearly that this was going to hurt badly. I remember knowing I couldn't stop it. My body curled slightly without me telling it to. My arms pulled in. My legs bent. There was no ground to brace for, no way to prepare. I fell about 20 feet. The impact was violent and absolute. My back hit first, slamming into the ground with a force that felt like it split me in half. The air was ripped from my lungs in one brutal moment. Pain exploded through my spine, white and blinding. It wasn't sharp at first. It was deep and crushing, like my body had been folded the wrong way. I tried to breathe and couldn't. My chest refused to move. My mouth opened, but no sound came out. My vision narrowed until the edges went dark. I remember leaves inches from my face, every vein and tear in them painfully clear. Then the pain changed. It sharpened, spreading outward from my lower back, radiating into my hips and legs. Felt wrong, like something inside me had shifted into a place it should never be. I tried to move my legs and felt nothing at first. That terrified me more than the pain ever could. My mind raced through possibilities I didn't want to think about. Paralyzed, stuck here, never walking again. The forest above me felt impossibly far away, like another world. The course I had been on seconds earlier might as well have been a memory from a different life. After a moment that felt endless, sensation crept back into my legs. It wasn't relief. It was pain. Burning, electric pain that made my muscles twitch and lock up. I gasped then, dragging air into my lungs in short, broken breaths. Each one sent more pain through my back. I lay there staring up through the trees, unable to move, afraid to try. My body felt fragile, like any shift could make things worse. The sky above was painfully blue, calm and indifferent. The wind moved the branches gently, the same as it had before I fell. Eventually, help came. Hands stabilized me. My body was carefully secured. Every tiny movement sent waves of pain through my spine. The world narrowed to sensations. Pressure, cold air on my face, the smell of dirt and leaves, the ache that never let up. At the hospital, scans confirmed what I already knew in my gut. My back was broken, not shattered beyond repair, but damaged enough to change everything. The words sounded unreal when I heard them. Broken back, spine injury, recovery, months, maybe longer. The days that followed blurred together. Pain medication dulled the edges but never erased the ache completely. I learned how to move again carefully, slowly, with help. Every shift in bed felt like a test. Every attempt to sit up was a gamble. Fear became constant, sitting just behind my thoughts. The hardest part wasn't the pain. It was the waiting to see if I could stand, waiting to see if I could take a step, waiting to learn what parts of my life were gone for good. When I finally stood, supported and shaking, it felt unreal. When I took my first careful steps, tears came without warning. Each movement hurt, but it worked. My legs helped me. My spine, damaged and angry, still did its job. Recovery was slow, painful, humbling. I relearned patience in a way I never had before. Every day was measured in small victories. Standing longer, walking farther, trusting my body again even though it had failed me once. I was told more than once how lucky I was, how close it had been, how different things could have turned out. I knew all of that already. I had felt it during the fall, in that quiet, clear moment when I understood exactly what was happening and couldn't stop it. I can still walk. That fact never stops feeling like a miracle. But I don't forget the cost. My back still aches. Some days it's a dull reminder. Other days it's sharp enough to pull me right back to that moment on the way down. I don't see heights the same way anymore. I don't trust systems blindly. I don't step into situations assuming nothing can go wrong. I know now how fast control can disappear, how quickly a normal day can turn into a life-changing fall. That single thought still echoes in my head sometimes. Oh no, I'm going to fall here. I survived it. I lived through the impact and the recovery and the fear that followed. I walked away eventually under my own power, but the memory never loosened its grip. It stays with me as a warning, a reminder of how fragile the line really is between standing safely above the ground and lying broken beneath it, staring up at the sky and hoping your body will still answer when you ask it to move. I don't remember being scared when it happened. That part only came later, years later, when I was old enough to understand how close I came to dying. At the time, I was just a kid following my dog into the woods, trusting him the way only a small child can. I was probably 4 years old. It was deep winter, the kind that settles into your bones and doesn't leave. We lived in a super rural area, miles from town, surrounded by woods in every direction. Our house sat alone at the edge of a clearing, with a long dirt driveway that disappeared into trees. In winter, everything felt bigger and quieter. Snow covered the ground in uneven layers, packed hard in some places and loose in others. The air always smelled clean and sharp, like ice and pine. I was bundled up in whatever winter clothes a 4-year-old usually wears. Thick coat, mittens attached with strings, boots that were probably a size too big. I had no sense of danger. Cold was just cold. The woods were just the woods I saw every day. My dog was a large German shepherd. He was huge compared to me, solid and confident, with thick fur and alert eyes. He was my shadow. Wherever I went, he went. I trusted him more than anyone else in the world. To me, he wasn't an animal. He was a guide, a protector. If he went somewhere, it felt safe to follow. That day, he wandered off the edge of the yard, not running, not excited, just walking, nose low, tail relaxed. I watched him go and followed without thinking. My mom didn't see me leave. She was inside the house, probably cooking or cleaning, doing normal things that felt safe and routine. I didn't think to tell her where I was going. I didn't think at all. The yard faded behind us quickly. The snow was deeper past the tree line, untouched and quiet. My boots sank with each step, leaving small prints that I didn't notice and wouldn't have known to follow anyway. The dog moved ahead of me, slow enough that I could keep up, occasionally stopping to look back and make sure I was still there. First, everything felt familiar. Trees, snow, silence. I had seen it all before, but the farther we went, the more everything started to look the same. Tree after tree, no landmarks, no house in sight. The world narrowed down to white ground and dark trunks. At some point, the dog stopped leading. I didn't understand it then, but I know now exactly what happened. He realized we were too far. He realized I was alone. Something in him switched. Instead of moving forward, he stayed close to me. He circled. He stood between me and the deeper woods. He didn't try to guide me back. He didn't know how. He just knew not to leave me alone. I remember standing there in the snow, feeling confused. I wanted to go home, but I didn't know which way home was. Every direction looked identical. The cold started to creep in slowly, not painful at first, just uncomfortable. My hands felt stiff inside my mittens. My nose ran. My legs felt heavy. Time passed, though I have no idea how much. A child doesn't measure time the way an adult does. There was no clock, no sense of urgency, just standing, shifting my weight, watching my breath puff out in small clouds. The dog stayed right beside me. Sometimes he would press against me, his fur warm through my coat. Sometimes he would stand tall and still, ears up, scanning the woods. He wouldn't let me wander off on my own. Every time I stepped too far in one direction, he gently blocked me, guiding me back without force. Looking back, that probably saved my life. The cold got worse. The kind of cold that stops being something you notice and starts being something that drains you. My boots felt wet. My legs felt slow. I remember sitting down at some point, sinking into the snow. Felt easier than standing. That's one of the most dangerous things I could have done. The dog reacted immediately. He nudged me, pushed against me, paced around me. He wouldn't let me stay still. I got back up because of him, even though I didn't know why. Somewhere far away, my mom realized I was gone. I don't remember hearing her voice. I don't remember panic or shouting. All of that happened outside my awareness. What I do know is that eventually the quiet of the woods changed. Faint sounds carried through the trees. Distant movement. Shapes that didn't belong. My dog noticed long before I did. He stiffened. His posture changed completely. The relaxed companion was gone. In his place was something intense and focused. He positioned himself directly in front of me. Body tense, eyes locked on the movement ahead. Figures came closer. Tall shapes in dark clothing. Heavy boots crunching through snow. I didn't recognize them as help. To me, they were just strangers in the woods. To my dog, they were a threat. He growled, low and deep, a sound I had never heard from him before. When one of them got too close, he lunged. Not playfully, not as a warning. He was serious. He was protecting me with everything he had. Later, I learned that cops and firefighters had been called. Emergency services. A full search. People fanning out through the woods in freezing temperatures because a 4-year-old had vanished. One of them almost got bitten badly trying to approach me. Eventually, they figured it out. They kept their distance. They moved slowly. Someone circled wide while another distracted the dog. Took time. It wasn't simple or clean. When they finally got to me, I was cold, exhausted, and quiet. Not crying, not panicking, just small and still in the snow. I don't remember the walk back. I don't remember being carried or wrapped up or loaded into a vehicle. Those details are gone. What stayed with me was the image of the woods closing in and my dog standing like a wall in front of me. Years later, when I was old enough to hear the story properly, it changed everything. I learned how cold it really was that day, how long I had been gone, how far we had wandered, how easily hypothermia could have set in, how sitting down in the snow could have been the last thing I ever did. I learned that my dog didn't lead me home because he didn't know how. He just knew not to abandon me. I learned that animals don't think in directions or plans the way humans do. They think in instincts. Protect, stay, guard. I also learned that if help had taken longer, if my dog hadn't kept me moving, if I had laid down and gone to sleep in the snow, I probably wouldn't be here now. That's the part that scares me. Not the memory itself. Not the woods or the cold or the search. The fact that I didn't feel afraid. I didn't know enough to be afraid. I didn't know I was in danger. Looking back as an adult, I can see every mistake clearly. Following a dog. Leaving the yard unnoticed. Wandering into winter woods without any sense of direction. Standing still in freezing temperatures. Sitting down in the snow. Any one of those could have been the end. The woods didn't try to hurt me. There was no monster. No threat you could point to. Just cold, distance, and time. That's all it takes. I still think about that day sometimes, especially in winter. I think about how quiet it must have been. How small I was out there. How thin the line really is between a normal day and something final. I walked away from it, I grew up. I lived my life. But every time I hear about someone lost in the woods, every time I see snow falling thick and heavy, I remember that 4-year-old version of myself standing in the trees, not scared, not crying, with no idea how close I was to disappearing completely. I don't remember it happening the way an adult remembers things. What I remember now is a mix of images, feelings, and the story I was told later, stitched together into something clear enough to understand just how close I came to not making it. At the time, I was only about 1.5 years old. I didn't know what danger was. I didn't know what winter could do to a small body. I didn't know I was lost. We lived in a house backed right up against thick woods. Real woods, not a few trees. Acres of forest that stretched farther than you could see. Quiet and deep even during the day. In winter, it felt bigger. The snow smoothed everything out, erased paths, softened sound. The trees stood bare and dark, and the cold settled into everything. That day was cold enough that the air hurt when you breathed it in. The kind of cold where snow doesn't melt or crunch, it just squeaks underfoot. I was bundled up, probably too much and not enough at the same time. A puffy coat, little boots, mittens that I likely pulled off at some point. Normal clothes for a toddler, not survival gear. Somehow I made it outside. Maybe a door didn't latch fully. Maybe someone was distracted for just a minute. It doesn't take long. 1.5 years is old enough to walk, curious enough to wander, and young enough to have no sense of consequences. One moment I was inside, and the next I wasn't. Behind the house, the yard faded quickly into trees. Snow covered everything, unbroken and inviting in that quiet way only snow can be. I toddled forward without fear, without purpose, just moving because that's what kids do. The woods didn't look threatening to me. They looked like more world. Our dog followed me. He was only about 1 year old himself, still young, still full of energy, but already deeply bonded to the family. A solid, loyal dog with thick fur and alert eyes. He noticed I was outside before anyone else did. He noticed I was heading somewhere I shouldn't, and instead of running off or barking or going back for help, he did the one thing that mattered. He stayed with me. As I wandered deeper into the trees, the house disappeared behind us. The familiar shapes were gone. Everything became white ground and dark trunks, repeating over and over. Snow swallowed my small footprints almost as soon as I made them. I didn't cry. I didn't call out. I didn't know I was supposed to. The cold crept in slowly. It didn't attack. It didn't shock. It just settled. My movements probably slowed. My hands grew stiff. My cheeks went numb. But none of that registered as danger. It was just how things felt. The dog stayed close the entire time. He walked beside me, sometimes ahead, sometimes behind. When I stumbled, he stopped. When I sat down, he circled back. He didn't leave. He didn't wander off. Something in him understood that I wasn't just another creature in the woods. I was his responsibility. At some point, I couldn't walk anymore. My legs were short and tired. The snow was deep compared to my size. I sat down, then leaned over, then curled up the way small kids do when they're done with everything. The cold that would terrify an adult just made me sleepy. That's the part that scares me the most now. Hypothermia doesn't always feel like pain. Sometimes it feels like comfort, like rest, like it's okay to stop. I curled up on the ground, tucked into myself, and fell asleep. The dog lay down with me. He pressed his body against mine, sharing heat, blocking the wind, creating a small pocket of warmth in the frozen woods. His fur was thick and dry. His body was solid and alive. He didn't run. He didn't pace. He didn't panic. He curled around me and stayed there. While I slept, my family realized I was gone. Panic doesn't begin to cover it. A missing toddler in winter, near woods, is every parent's nightmare. They searched the house, the yard, the road. They called my name over and over, voices cracking, breath turning white in the air. Minutes stretched too long. Every second mattered. They spread out into the woods, scanning the snow, looking for tracks, signs, anything. Fear built with every step. Thoughts no one wants to think crept in fast and loud. Somewhere out there, I slept. I wasn't crying. I wasn't moving. I wasn't cold enough yet to wake up scared. I was just a small shape curled into the snow with a dog wrapped around me like a shield. After about an hour, they found us. I imagine the sight hit them all at once. A tiny body in the snow, too still, too quiet, and then the dog, lifting his head, alert, protective, unwilling to move until he understood this was safe. I was alive, cold but alive, breathing, sleeping. They rushed me inside, wrapped me up, warmed me slowly. The dog followed, staying close, watching everything. I don't remember the fear on their faces or the relief that followed. I only know it happened because I'm here to know it now. As I got older, the story became part of family history. Something told carefully, always with a pause at the end. Always with the same conclusion. That dog saved your life. At first, it didn't feel real. Stories from when you're too young to remember feel distant, like they belong to someone else. But as I grew up and learned more about cold, about how fast small bodies lose heat, about how dangerous winter woods are even for adults, the weight of it settled in. I realized how easily that story could have ended differently. If the dog hadn't followed me, if he had gone off exploring, if he hadn't laid down with me, if he hadn't shared his warmth, if they had found me even a little later, any one of those things could have changed everything. That dog lived a long life. 14 years. He grew old slowly, gray creeping into his face, movements stiffening, eyes still gentle and watchful. He stayed loyal until the very end. When he finally passed, it hurt in a way only losing something pure can hurt. People like to say pets cross the rainbow bridge. I don't think about it like that. I think about a cold winter day, deep woods, and a 1-year-old dog who chose to lie down in the snow and guard a sleeping child instead of leaving. That was real. That happened. No magic, no miracle, just instinct, loyalty, and timing. I don't remember the fear from that day, but I carry the understanding of it now. I know how close I came. I know how quiet danger can be. I know how easily a normal day can turn into something final without warning. Every winter, when snow falls heavy and the woods go silent, I think about that small version of myself curled up in the cold. I think about how unaware I was, and I think about the dog who stayed. I lived because he did. I went hiking and camping in the Grand Canyon several years ago, back when I still thought planning meant reading a trail map and checking the weather once. I remember feeling proud of myself for being prepared. I had a decent pack, enough food, a small tent, and the confidence that comes from not yet having learned how fast nature can turn on you. The canyon felt massive and quiet in a way that made everything else in my life feel small. The walls rose up like they had always been there and always would be. The air during the day was dry and warm, and at night it dropped fast, but it still felt manageable. Nothing about that place felt threatening when I first set up camp. My campsite was down in a side canyon, close to a dry wash that looked harmless. It was nothing but sand, rocks, and a few twisted shrubs. There were signs warning about flash floods, but the wash was bone dry, and the sky above me was clear when I went to sleep. I remember lying in my tent listening to the soft sound of wind moving through the canyon, feeling tired in a good way. The stars were bright earlier that night, sharper than I had ever seen them. I fell asleep thinking I had picked the perfect spot. Sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up because something felt wrong. At first, I could not tell what it was. The darkness felt heavier, and the air felt colder. Then I heard it, a deep, low sound, like distant thunder trapped between the canyon walls. It was not rain where I was, but the sound kept growing. The ground seemed to vibrate under me. I sat up in my sleeping bag, trying to understand what I was hearing, and that was when panic started to creep in. The sound turned into a roar. Not the kind of roar that comes from wind, but something heavier and more solid. I crawled out of the tent, and the smell hit me first. Wet earth and mud, sharp and sudden. The dry wash was no longer dry. A wall of dark water came rushing through the canyon, carrying branches, rocks, and things I could not identify in the darkness. It moved fast, faster than my brain could fully process. The beam from my headlamp caught bits of white foam and spinning debris. The water was already swallowing the ground where my camp had been. I did not have time to think. I grabbed what I could, but most of my gear was gone almost immediately. The water pulled my tent away like it weighed nothing. My pack tipped over and vanished into the black rush. The cold hit me next, sharp and biting. The water soaked my legs, and the shock of it stole my breath. I knew I could not stay where I was. If I fell, if I got pulled in, there would be no way out. I saw a huge boulder along the side of the canyon, higher than the rest of the ground. It was rough and steep, wedged against the canyon wall like it had been dropped there long ago. I forced myself toward it, slipping on wet rocks, using my hands to keep from falling. My heart was pounding so hard it felt like it was shaking my whole body. I managed to climb up onto the boulder, scraping my hands and knees, and pulled myself as high as I could. From that spot, I could see my campsite being erased. Everything I had brought with me was gone. The flood filled the canyon from wall to wall, a moving river where there had been empty sand just hours before. The noise was constant and overwhelming. The darkness made it worse. I could not see where the water ended or what it was carrying. I just knew that if I slipped, it would take me. I curled myself against the stone, trying to make my body as small as possible. The rock was freezing. The water sprayed mist into the air, and the wind pushed it against me. My clothes were soaked, and I started to shake almost immediately. My teeth chattered, and my muscles cramped from holding the same position. I wrapped my arms around my legs and pressed my chest into my knees, trying to keep what little heat I had. Time stopped making sense. Minutes felt like hours. Hours felt endless. The flood did not slow down. It kept roaring through the canyon, completely filling the space below me. I could feel the cold sinking deeper into my bones. My hands went numb. My feet felt like they were no longer part of my body. I kept forcing myself to stay awake because I knew that closing my eyes for too long could be dangerous. I focused on the feeling of the rock under me, on the sound of the water, on my own breathing. At some point, exhaustion took over. My thoughts became slow and foggy. I remember thinking about how small I was compared to the canyon, how little it cared that I was there. The idea that this place would keep existing exactly the same whether I survived or not was terrifying and calming at the same time. I tried to move my fingers and toes every so often, just to make sure I still could. Each movement hurt. The sky eventually started to lighten, but the sun did not reach me. The canyon walls kept me in shadow. The floodwater was still moving, though it was not as violent as before. What had been my campsite was completely gone, replaced by mud, rocks, and tangled debris. Seeing it in the dim light made everything feel more real. There was no denying how close I had come to being taken with it. When full daylight finally arrived, I could hear something else over the water, a distant, rhythmic sound that did not belong to the canyon. It grew louder over time, echoing off the rock walls. A helicopter came into view above the canyon rim, moving slowly, searching. The sound was almost unreal after so many hours of nothing but water and wind. I felt a rush of relief so strong it made me dizzy. The helicopter hovered above, fighting the air currents that moved through the canyon. The wind from the blades whipped dust and mist around me. I stayed as still as I could, clinging to the rock. A rescuer was lowered down, careful and steady, and reached me on the boulder. My body felt weak and stiff, and standing took more effort than I expected. I was secured and lifted up, the ground dropping away beneath me. The canyon that had felt so crushing just hours earlier slowly pulled back and opened up. From the air, the damage was clear. The path of the flood cut through the canyon like a scar. What had been dry and calm was torn apart. I was flown out and taken to safety, wrapped in warmth, my shaking finally slowing. The cold lingered in me for hours, even after I was out of danger. In the days after, the images stayed with me. The sound of the water, the darkness, the feeling of that rock under my hands. I realized how quickly confidence can turn into fear, and how thin the line is between a good memory and a disaster. I survived because I was lucky and because I found that boulder in time. The canyon did not change for me, simply did what it always does. When I think back on that night now, it is not just fear that stands out. It is the clarity of it. The understanding that nature does not warn you twice, and it does not care how prepared you think you are. I walked away from the Grand Canyon with nothing I had packed, but I left with my life. That is the only reason this story has an ending at all.